very warm welcome to everybody. We have it in English today. Native English speaker, obviously. And some others are here as well who prefer to have it in English. And because we're recording it, if you don't want to be on screen, don't look into the camera, please. And of course we will show that on YouTube again. My name is Thomas Zeinzinger. For the ones which see me first time, I'm running the Blockchainhub Graz here, and we have more or less monthly meetups here in that space. So if you're interested and are subscribed as a guest, then please get your notifications by subscribing to the meetup. I give a short introduction, and then we go to a main act, and then we will have another discussion. So first, the sponsors, because Lab10 Collective, this is basically the cooperative which is working in that space, working on blockchain projects, and a lot of guys and my wife are basically part of that collective. The e-Government Innovation Center, represented by Andreas here, who will give a talk and will give us further insight. And Danube Tech, Markus Sabadello over there, who came that far away from Vienna, or maybe San Francisco, I don't know, where you have been last time. So very, very happy to have him here as well. I jump right into something where I have been with a couple of colleagues last week, DEFCON 4 in Prague. If you have not been there, or has anybody been there, because there were so many people, it might be that you have been there and we have not seen you. So anybody? No? Okay. Well, then you need to watch all the videos, of course, because that was awesome. So I really, it's like I've been to quite many conferences, but this was exceptional, and you should kind of find out what basically the current status of Ethereum is, what they're doing, what they're planning to do, and so on and so on. So basically, that's the yearly developer conference where everything is kind of told, what is planned, what is already done, what is new, and so on and so on. And because the ecosystem is really huge, it is really making quite some progress in the development there. So check it out. So then I thought, because I stumbled over something just the other day, and we're such a serious crowd, I wanted to give you some kind of, satire, some kind of, utility token. Utility token, do they have any value or not? And that's probably one of those videos you should have seen. You should basically see it with this kind of, I should question every utility token at least twice, if there is any utility in that particular utility token. I'm pretty sure you will like that video, and it's just 2 minutes, so basically we can watch that here as well.
Perfect. I am dying out here. How much?
$1 worth of Lemoncoin, which is approximately 1,000 Lemoncoins. Whoa. Get that centralized currency out of my face. This is 2018. I only accept cryptocurrency here, preferably Lemoncoin.
I don't have whatever Lemoncoin is.
Well, Lemoncoin's my utility token. It doesn't have a lot of utility yet, but we're working on it. One day it might go to $1.
Cool. I don't have Lemoncoin.
Fine. I'll also take Bitcoin or Doge.
I'm sorry, buddy. I'll be right back someday.
You need like 200 of those.
How much is one Doge even worth?
One Doge always equals one Doge.
Okay, fine. How do I get Lemoncoin? Why is this so difficult?
I can sense your frustration. Think about it. It's the future of business. A trustless system without third parties. So to get Lemoncoin, I just need you to create an account on this third-party exchange.
You're going to need your passport, bank info, social security number, and a selfie with today's date.
I thought you said this was a trustless system.
Oh, it is as soon as the exchange trusts you.
You can trust it. We are the #1 crypto exchange in all of Krashimia.
I don't think that's a real country.
Look, you can make this an easy transaction if you just follow the protocol. Okay? Okay.
Smile, say KYC. This will take 3 to 5 days to process. After that, when you are approved, you would probably not be notified. So check back in a week or so.
This is ridiculous. You're telling me that if anybody wants to buy lemonade, they need to go through this process?
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is the future of business. I've already got like a dozen customers.
So I hope you liked it. So the future of business, as we know it, is utility tokens like Lemoncoins. So you find that on YouTube if you want to share it with your friends. Back to the serious stuff. So just for a short intro for the ones which don't know what Blockchainhub Graz is. We are a network of hubs, and we're fairly independent. Basically, the most active one is probably Graz right now, and we are clearly non-profit. Work to translate blockchain, although I know the crowd quite well now. So this is like, there is no need for a lot of translation right now. But of course, if you are new to the space, then there are plenty of people here can explain it. Yeah, and connect to various networks and organizations. So basically, trying to keep the train rolling, even if adoption is not really increasing. I just saw on DEF CON a presentation from Imingen Syra, which kind of shows like 500 retailers, the big ones, and basically Bitcoin payment adoption, and it's like I think 3333, 5555, 4444. So basically, there is no increase of adoption if you look at big retailers. So you can't really say that kind of the cryptocurrency adoption is already kind of in a broad phase. So it might be coming, you don't know yet. So anyway, we are quite a big meetup here. 5:15 I checked today. Didn't update the other ones, but we are close to JavaScript in Graz, so they are the leaders right now. If we get another 30, I think, then we can push them off the throne and be the biggest meetup in Graz. For the ones which want to read something about blockchain, we wrote a piece 2016. If you read it, please tell me if it's still up to date. It was written in the intent to be, but of course there are so many new things happening that you can't keep up with the speed when writing something down. We also have a YouTube channel, so basically the YouTube channel will have that video on it, so if you want to show what is discussed, presented today, you can see that there as well. And the slides, do we get your slides? Yeah, good. So we will upload the slides as well to the SlideShare channel. And yeah, you can see them there as well, and also the others, of course. So today is all about self-sovereign identity, and basically I will say a couple of words because we at the Lab 10 Collective are also working on something which is very much connected to self-sovereign identity. And what we're working on is called Minerva. It's a digital wallet. And as you can see on the screen over there, it's handling identities, values, and some other things as well. So basically, it's a combination of identity storage as well as valuable storage. So the work what we are doing there is kind of intensively focused on, besides a couple of other projects, and we're really super happy that basically we're working on something which is at the forefront of the current development. So you can see that within the blockchain space as well as the identity space, that this is really kind of picking up speed everywhere. And having said that, we look for devs all the time. So they can be female, they can be male. Usually they look like this when they're male, but can look at like this if they're female, but they don't have to. I just looked up some pictures on the internet. So basically we're looking for interesting people or interested people which want to extend our capabilities, and it doesn't have to be only devs. So basically trying to keep up the speed and try to bring up something which is able to be as fast as needed in that environment what we're working in. So if we don't get it fast enough on the ground, somebody else will. So that's the point. So coming to today's talk. It is really a pleasure to have Andreas here. Andreas, he wrote quite an extensive piece about self-sovereign identity, so you will find that on the internet. He's probably showing the link anyway, and you find that on the web page of the e-government innovation center. You find that and a lot of other interesting information on what they're working on. Yeah, we will have about an hour, including questions, and then we will do a sort of fireside chat with Andreas, with Markus, and I will take also part, and then basically after that you can drink as many beers as you like. Speaking of beers, basically if you have drunken too much of them, the toilet is here, so, and the exit is over there. So basically I would encourage everybody to hook up with the people and talk whatever kind of things come into your mind. And yeah, now it's Andreas' turn. Thank you.
So thank you, Thomas. Thanks for having me here tonight. My name is Andreas Abraham. First, I wanted to introduce myself. As Thomas already mentioned, I'm working at EGITS, the e-Government Innovation Center, which is a part of the TU Graz. What we are doing there is we are researching things for the e-government. We are working a lot with electronic identities and signatures, and try to keep up to date. And we also evaluate the newest technologies and try to figure out if this could help to improve the e-government. Additionally, we also provide some software, for example, to sign PDF signatures, or the citizen card environment is also provided by us. And today I wanted to give you a short overview over self-sovereign identity, the concept, and also the motivation and its potential. Let me start with a short overview. First, I wanted to tell you what are actually digital identities, and then what is identity management. Then we will identify the problems of identity management. Then we will look if the blockchain can help to solve these problems. Then I will give you a short overview over the evaluation of the identity models. This is required to better understand the self-sovereign identity and its architecture, the potential and the use cases. And finally, I will give you a short insight about the research what we have done related to self-sovereign identities. Every day we're using different online services, and some of these services require digital identities. For example, if I go to Facebook, I have to register there first, and then they have my digital identity, and then I can use this to access the service. So, but what is actually a digital identity? Bertino and Takahashi defined it as known information about the digital representation of a specific individual or organization. So this means that digital identities consists of three main parts. The first part is an identifier. An identifier identifies a user, which can be, for example, an email address. This identifier should also be unique in a certain domain. The second part is attributes. So attributes are statements about a user. For example, a birth date, a first name, a last name. These are attributes of a user. And the third part are credentials. Credentials are to prove the attributes, which could be certificates and password. And to better understand how they relate to each other, there is the identity, the digital identity triangle, which shows the relation of the identifier to the digital identity to the subject, which is the user. The identifier refers to the subject, the identifier stands for the digital identity, and the digital identity stands for the user. Now we have digital identities, and digital identities require identity management. Identity management are the processes, the technologies, and the policies which are required to manage digital identities and also the resource access. This includes managing of the identities where they are going to be stored and the identity lifecycle. The identity lifecycle consists of stages which be in the life cycle of an identity. For example, the create stage is when the identity is created, the usage stage is when it is used, maintain when it is maintained, and the delete when it actually is deleted. And all of these stages are controlled by the governance, and governance are the laws, the rules, the guideline, the policies, how these four stages are being performed. And last but not least, the access right. So this is also managed by identity management. So what are the problems? First of all, the web was not designed for digital identities. So when they created the internet, nobody thought of digital identities or something like this. And this leads to the problem that companies create their own IDM solutions, identity management solutions. So why is this a problem? Well, because companies, huge companies like Facebook or Google or whatever, they have millions of digital identities stored and in these silos. So there are many of these silos, and this is a problem. Second is a problem that if you create such an identity, you're not in control over the identity, and neither you have the ownership of the identity data. For example, if you create a Facebook account and you upload the picture, then you're giving Facebook actually the right to reuse the picture for whatever reason. So you're not in control. And if Facebook decides, well, I'm going to delete this user, well, you cannot do anything against it. So you have just not the control over it. Additionally, these identity silos attract attackers, because if you're a hacker, what are you going to do? You're not going to try to hack a small company. No, you're going to try to attack the big companies and to get as many as possible identity data. And And another problem is that you have to trust these organizations. And because they store your data and they maintain your identity data. And I want to underline my statements with the following examples. There was in 2017 the Equifax data breach. Equifax is a credit company, a credit reporting agency based in the US. What they do is they have sensitive information from the users, which they calculate the credit score and things like that. And 145 million, the data sets of 145 million American citizens were exposed. So, and these were sensitive information, like if someone has trouble with money and these things. So I don't think that people are happy about it. And the next is the Facebook data breach this year, where 50 million profiles were exposed. But I think this is only 1 out of 3 actually data breaches from Facebook. The others were, I think, the Cambridge Analytica used some data. So now to the blockchain. So can the blockchain actually help to solve this problem? But the question is, what do we actually mean when we talk about the blockchain? I recently noticed, or not recently, but I noticed when I talk to people about blockchain, that even if you think you talk about the same thing, you'll find out, if you talk a little more, that it might not be the same thing, and it can be actually something totally different. So what does the term blockchain actually stand for? So it can mean the actual chain of blocks which are connected through cryptographic hashes, for example. Or it can also represent a cryptocurrency. If you Google blockchain today, you will find lots of information about cryptocurrencies. Or it can also be an umbrella term. An umbrella term over a collection of tools and frenzy cryptography. A whole system. So, but what is a blockchain actually? A blockchain is a special case of a distributed ledger. And in the SSE context, distributed ledger or distributed ledger technology is more often used, and this is why in this presentation we will stick to distributed ledger. And back to the question, can the blockchain or the distributed ledger help to solve this problem? Then the answer is it depends. I wanted to give you a high-level overview over the SSE concept. So first of all, self-sovereign identity. The sovereignty means that you are only in power and only you are in power of the data. So in identity management, it means that the user fully controls their own identity data. This means that the user is able to create, to update, to delete, and also to decide what data are going to be shared. Joe Andreu defined the core characteristics of self-sovereign identity, which is control, acceptance, and zero costs. So as control, he means that the user is fully in control of the identity data. For acceptance, that the SSE is accepted when through different contexts, and the SSE should follow the minimal cost principle. So Christopher Allen defined the 10 principles of self-sovereign identity, but he did not just came up with this. What he did is he compiled related work to this. So he said the 10 starts with existence, so the user actually has to exist independently to be able to use a self-sovereign identity. Then the user has to be in full control over the self-sovereign identity. The user must always have access to their identity data. Then transparency means that all the algorithms are used in the systems have to be transparent. Interoperability means that the identity should be sorry, I lost it. Transparency. Persistence is that the identity must be long-lived. Portability is that the information and the services about identity must be transportable. Interoperability is that the identity data should use as widely as possible. Consent, that the user have to give his consent to data use. Minimalization is that only the data are going to be disclosed which are actually being needed. And protection, the user has the right that his identity data are being protected. I will give you a short overview into identity management for a better understanding for the self-sovereign identity. The actors in identity management are the subject, the user, which has the digital identity, then the identity provider. Identity provider, in most cases, stores the identity data. And the identification and authentication is performed at the IDB. The service provider, as the name says, provides a service or access to a resource. And there is also a control party, sometimes which can check the compliance of policies, guidelines, and so on. This control party could be a public authority or something like this. One of the first identity models was the isolated identity model. Here is the case where the service provider and the identity provider are the same party. The identity data are stored at this party, and the user has to identify and authenticate himself towards this party and then gets access. And an example for this would be Facebook, because I have to log in there and then I get access to the service. Evolved from this, there was the central identity model, where the identity provider and the service provider are separated. The identity provider stores the identity data. And here you have to identify and authenticate yourself against the identity provider, and the identity data are transferred to the service provider. So this is also Facebook. Facebook can act as identity provider. When you went to, I think everybody went to a website where there was like a register button or login with Facebook, and this is exactly what happens. When you press login with Facebook, your request is redirected to Facebook. You have to log in there, and then the identity data are being transferred to the service provider. The problem is you have this identity provider which stores the identity data, and the user has no control over the identity data transfer. Then there's also the federated identity model, where the identity data are split up to many identity providers or more than one. None of the identity providers has all the identity data. The problem here with this is that the identity data have to be linked to each other. This is often performed through a common identifier, which is also problematic. And also that a trust relationship has to be established before you could actually use this federated system. So finally, the user-centric model. the user-centric model is pretty much like the central model. But here the big difference is that the identity data are stored in the user domain. And the user domain is something where the user has control of. Like an example from the user-centric identity model is the mobile phone signature, handy signature, or citizen card environment in Austria. Because you have this social card where your actually identity data are stored on. And so this is really in my hand, and sharing of my identity data requires my consent, my explicit consent. So the self-sovereign identity model can be seen as the next step after the user-centric model. In this self-sovereign identity model, the user fully controls the identity data, but without having to trust a central authority. The user is able to create, update, delete their own identity. This can be done using the distributed ledger technology. And because the trust is distributed to the nodes which hold a copy of the ledger. We have identified some requirements for an architecture from a self-sovereign identity architecture. As ledger type, a permissioned or private ledger is beneficial for a self-sovereign identity system, since mining or other public ledger-related consensus mechanisms could cause a problem or the loss of control. This permissioned ledger is based on trusted nodes, where everybody holds a copy of the ledger. Additionally, we need a consensus mechanism, as I said, no mining. Instead, something like a Byzantine fault tolerance protocol. There are various versions or schemes. This would be a good mechanism, because you only want to detect if one node is faulty. Then we also need some kind of identifier which does not require a central authority for issuing. There is this decentralized identifier, the DID. This is a W3C standard, which was actually created to support self-sovereign identities. Then we also need a lightweight data format, such as the verifiable claim schema, which is a JSON schema. And this is also a W3C standard, and also had the goal, or was created for the purpose of self-sovereign identities. Another thing which is important is the data storage. No sensitive data, no personal data should be stored on the ledger. So the sensitive identity data should always be stored in the user domain. And the self-sovereign identity architecture should also have the feature to import data or to gather data about a user. This is or can be performed through trust anchors or agents. They have various names in the literature. These are actually nodes which can issue claims for users. And the self-sovereign identity should also support selective attribute disclosure. So an architecture could look like this. So this in the cloud are the validator node, which hold a copy of the ledger and perform the consensus protocol. The trust anchor or agent can issue the claims, which are stored then in the identity wallet. we called it identity wallet. We just wanted to illustrate that this is stored in the user domain and that the identity data and the private keys are stored in there. And the service provider can then verify with the public key from the user that the claim belongs to the user, and also who was the issuer, or that the issuer was trusted. Or so the potential of self-sovereign identity. The potential is it extends the identity management model by solving trust issues in a central authority. It can also support to be GDPR compliance. So if someone thinks I'm going to create my own IDM model, IDM system, then you might consider using self-sovereign identity model in order to be GDPR compliant. It can also be used as a decentralized public infrastructure with the big enhancement that you have no single point of failure. Since it is not bound to a specific country, the usage of identity data can be then all over the world. And we also thought that combining it, if you have a self-sovereign identity system and you could combine it with an existing system, that this would be also beneficial, and the model, the self-sovereign identity has this potential. So the use cases. A typical use case is, for example, a user wants to apply for a job, and this job requires a master's degree. And the company wants to verify if the user has a master's degree. So the user has to go to the university and requests a claim which says, yeah, I'm holding a master here. So and this claim is then signed by the university and stored in the identity wallet. And if the user decides, yes, I want this job so much, so I will send this claim to the company can then verify that this claim belongs to me, and also that the claim was issued by the university. Then another use cases would be privacy-preserving claim attestation. For example, there is a student, his name is John, and he has some physical disabilities, and they require some special services, and he wants to study at the university. So what he is going to do is he requests this special services at the university, but the university wants attestation about that he really has some physical condition. So John has some medical attestations issued by his health operator, but they contain much more information which he would not like to share with the university. So what he does is he only shares the attribute that, or the attestation that he has this reduced mobility capabilities. And the university can then verify that. And all other information are not relieved or disclosed. And the second thing, for example, he can prove his age of maturity. So John is now a student and he has to prove his age of maturity to a public authority, but he does not want to disclose his actual birth date. So, but he proves that his age is bigger than 18, and the public authority can verify that, and everything is fine. So, finally, I want to talk about research, what we did at the EGITS. What we tried to do is we created a generic approach how to connect existing SSE system with an already existing identity management system. So we want to import the identity data from the existing system into the self-sovereign identity system. And with the big benefits of this work was without having to change the existing identity management system. So this means we generated a process which allowed us to almost use any existing IDM system and import data from there. And there was further work on this, so we also improved this by creating a privacy-preserving way of doing that. All the steps were performed on encrypted data, so no intermediate party ever had the plain data except the user, and the user, this is fine because these are his or her data. I wanted to give you a short overview how this looks. So on the right side is the existing SSE system with the trust anchors and the validator nodes. And here is the existing identity management system, which can be almost any system. And what we did is we created like another agent. And this agent was acted like an interface between the self-sovereign identity system and the existing identity system. So it issued the claims. So what happened was you first have to log in to your identity wallet. Then you trigger the identity import from an existing IDM system. You're going to be redirected, and then you have to identify and authenticate yourself at the existing IDM. And the identity data are issued to the SSE importer agent, and this importer agent sends then this data to the validator network, and what they do is they perform some kind of transformation, but this would be critical since the original signature on the data would be broken. So, but what we did is we distributed the trust to the validator node. So we said, well, we don't trust in one of these nodes, but we trust in the network, and if everybody did it correctly, then it should be fine. And this is proven by a multi-signature, which is added at the end, and then the identity data are stored at the user domain. So that was it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention. Questions?
Yes. Yeah. What about if one claim is no longer valid?
Sorry? Revocation?
I'm a bit, if for some reason the university degree gets revoked.
Yeah. Usually it's like this, that one of these these trust anchors, which can issue, they also have like a revocation list. So in the claim are also can be revocation information, like where is a list or what method is used.
Okay, but as a user, for instance, I know my claim was revoked, so I would give out my old claim.
The revoked one?
Yes. How does this?
But
the service who checks this claim gets this information.
Yeah, he gets.
Want to share it, or is this beforehand to look up where?
No. The service provider has to look up.
Okay. Because I understand if it's signed perfectly.
Yeah, if you sign it, it can still be revoked.
Yeah. You have to look up the information for revoking somewhere.
Yeah. In the claim are revocation information, like a URL to a revocation list or something like this. So he has the information where to look, and usually the trust anchor, which issues the claims, has to also hold a list which claims are revoked. But there are other mechanisms, like it doesn't have to be a revocation list, but something similar, some revocation mechanism. Yes?
Yeah. Are you aware of implementations of such import extensions?
Actually, this implementation, which was this implementation is online now on our website. There is an importer. The only thing you need is Austrian mobile phone signature. We have this running at our IIK on a virtual machine. There are 4 nodes running which perform the transformation. So this is online, but this is the basic version. We're currently working on an extended version, on the privacy preserving version. This is not, there's no proof of concept yet online available.
Maybe I didn't get it, but how do you deal with problems of identity theft?
Where?
As far as I got it, you centralized the identification management with all the data on, I don't know, maybe
Here?
PC or
Here?
on this diagram, for example, in
Okay.
general. Because if someone, whatever, I don't know what you use for the, let's say, authentication of the user against the wallet.
Yeah.
If this somehow gets compromised or what?
I mean, the identity wallet, it depends how you implement it. You know, there is no one solution.
No, but maybe you can tell me some concepts, because I heard it's one of the main issues of the
Exactly. No, it really is. There are authentication is really a big problem. Also because the owner of the private key owns actually the identity. So, and you don't want identity theft, as you just mentioned. But it is possible to write a mobile phone app, for example, where the private key is generated and is never left the device, which is stored in a secure element. The only thing you have to do is then you have to authenticate yourself towards the phone, like biometry, for example. Then you have two factors. You are in possession of the phone, you put your fingerprint, you unlock the private key, and the private key you use then for signing the challenge.
No, it's just a thought I was discussing recently. They said the more difficult you make actually to steal it, the more difficult it is then, if it happens, to prove that it has happened.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So there's
there's no concrete implementation for the identity wallet. Yeah. So we focused more. Our focus was more on this side here, and we extended the validator nodes and this stuff. This was for now out of scope, but will be addressed very soon.
The validator nodes,
Yes.
I assume in your proof of concept they all run the same software.
Yeah.
So
They have to run the same software.
they have to perform the same function, but they don't have to run the same software, because there is actually a risk that if the implementation is the same on every node, and every node has the same bug.
Okay.
If you get transformation, then you have a problem. But if it's independently implemented, then you have the chance that it gets exposed.
Yeah, that's true, but then I would have to trust every implementer, every developer. I think you have to...
You can audit source code.
Okay, but you might not want to trust someone else in implementing, but if everybody uses the same code, then of course everybody has the same problem, but I can also be sure that the output is the same. And the idea of the validator nodes is to not perform its own code. The idea is to distribute the trust and to eliminate miscellaneous malicious nodes. So you don't want that someone does something which is not correct. And this is what you want to do. You are checking what the others are doing, and they should run the same code. And it's true, if there's a bug like in Bitcoin just recently, then all have it, but I think implementing it, everybody, their own code could also be problematic and create maybe other problems.
Are there more questions?
You mentioned about that you compare the SSI solution with current identity management systems. Did you compare it with the specific implementation of the SSI, or?
Yes. Yes.
And yes, if yes, which?
Yes.
Which one?
As Thomas mentioned, this presentation was based on this white paper I wrote, and in the white paper I surveyed. I mean, this was beginning of last year. Okay, I published it later, but I surveyed many implementations, And we also defined some criteria and requirements, and the outcome was that Sovereign, Markus Sabadello is involved in this, it fulfills actually the needs you need of a self-sovereign identity model. The problem was, for example, with UBoard, it's closed source, so I cannot do anything with it. I cannot, it's closed source. So, and I think Sovereign is really good in this.
Can you just compare with the Sovereign?
No, we have. What do you mean with compared?
Because you said that you evaluated different SSI solutions, right, to see how it would fit into this schema, like connecting it with the existing identity management systems. And I'm just wondering which kind of SSI networks you compare with. Like Sovereign was one of them. It was the only network
we tried to evaluate a few, but at the end there were 5 which we compared with each other, and then the conclusion was that Sovereign, or let's say, it was worth these 5, and the other were not so interesting for us, and the outcome was that Sovereign was the best candidate.
Could you name those 5? Or
I think it's. I have to. Yeah, you have to look it up. Ethereum, for example.
Any more questions?
What incentives do validator nodes have to run this?
That's a good question.
And to stay honest.
Well, you would find out if they're not staying honest.
But they could.
Yes, but if I have more nodes which have different ideas why to do that, and parties which would not work with each other, then the chances that they collude is going to be even smaller. Of course, you don't have guarantee. If the whole world works together, then this whole system will not hold.
Yeah.
That's difficult to say. They can just participate in this self-sovereign identity network and say, okay, because this costs nothing, so I will also host one of the validator nodes.
But it's a permission system, so they need to apply for even being able to do this. So if
Absolutely.
I'm just a random person and say, oh yeah,
no,
this sounds
it has to be an organization,
yeah.
and
so
this.
It even has a big entrance hurdle, and then
Yes.
it has no visible benefit.
No, it has no benefit. The benefit is participating in the self-sovereign identity model. It's like, you say, I want to be maybe a trust anchor, but maybe I also want that this system is becoming bigger, so I will also host one of these nodes.
Okay, the reputation of benefit.
Yes.
Yeah, my question, maybe it's already answered, but can anybody run this import agent? And also, will it be part of the Austrian identity?
Well, this is what we don't want, that it has to be again such a strong trust in a central party, but it cannot be run from anybody. So I think the role as we showed it here as normal trust anchor, which can be, for example, a university or whatever, so organization, something like this, would fit good for this role.
Robert,
one more question in the context, since you're from the government, you're looking on that from the government perspective.
Yes.
Could you provide, because some of the reasons are pretty obvious why it should or would like to run an SSI solution. Could you name a few the main reasons why they're looking at that kind of solution? Because from my perspective, I can see that the government is a kind of entity which basically, through the controlling of the identity, they have some kind of power, right? They can basically, we see that through the national ID or the passport, that they can tell you where you can go or not, right? How does that solution fit into the current government plan of with the SSI, they will not be in control of that anymore.
This does not fit into the governmental idea. This was my personal trigger. I was interested in this self-sovereign identity, and it was never planned to use this in the e-government. It was just scientific, academical research in like to find out what is possible with a decentralized system.
So another question: is there any hope to convince government to actually look at that solution?
The thing is, to be honest, if the government would want to use self-sovereign identities, it would just simply issue self-sovereign identities in the format which is needed. So it would not need my the transformation. But the transformation was like I can adapt to almost any identity system.
So following this question, what is your prediction on adoption of this system? When will be the first elections that I don't have to show my driver's license?
Okay, this is...
other applications that says it will be in general use.
Okay. This answer has nothing to do with this right now. Okay. But there is actually something going on with this. And I think in the next years it should be possible to have a mobile phone app which contains personal information, like a personal identity card or the driving license and things like that, and which is officially from the government. So then you will have your app and can use it on the phone. So this is planned in the next years.
Will this use exactly this architecture?
No, it has nothing to do with this.
Okay.
Nothing to do with this.
But
it has.
This architecture then.
Sorry?
But what I would be interested what is your prediction about this architecture?
This architecture.
It will be really adopted.
I think.
Just a medium step before something else comes.
I don't know if this solution will ever be adopted or the other one, because you also have to convince the self-sovereign identity system to adopt their code. We modified it, and we actually misused some functionality. We extended the Byzantine fault tolerance protocol, and this, I don't know if this is so well accepted.
Does the identity provider in this scheme have to cooperate with your system, or does it not even know that it is being used in that way?
Well,
I could use this for Facebook.
If you have a login with Facebook, yes, of course.
So the identity provider is kind of separate from this scheme as well.
Absolutely. So what you have to do is, this interface, what you have to do is you have to connect to the identity provider. Facebook offers this possibility. In other cases, like we did it with the EIDAS node from Austria, which issues a qualified identity data. This would not be possible because this node only talks to known service providers. And then you could not just adapt this, but the others would be possible.
I could put in a proof that my birth date on Facebook is older than 18 years.
Yeah, I mean, under the assumption that you gave the correct information to Facebook.
But it's just that I can prove that my birth date on Facebook is not that my real birth.
Yeah, that's true, but what we did is, for example, we connected to this national system, to the Austrian. So you actually import then qualified identity data.
Or I can prove that I have access to this and this certificate on that data.
Maybe, yeah.
There are any more questions? But where does the graphic come from that import process was correct? Because I won't get the digital signature from Facebook, I guess, or do I?
I don't know, I think Facebook runs OpenID Connect. I think there is a signature on the data, if you get it from Facebook. I don't know the implementation.
So the signature is also important with the data, so that way I don't have to trust the import gateway.
Yes, not here, but you have to trust that all the validator nodes perform this correctly. The trust is separated. So what is going to happen is the identity assertion arrives here at the SSE import agent. So we say the SSE import agent is considered as honest but curious. So he's not malicious. He requests EID transformation since we're using verifiable claim format here. And in the validator nodes, this is performed like first the signature is verified. So each node does this. So the signature is verified, then the claim is transformed to this JSON and signed, and then they exchange this claim with each other. So every node has all the claims, and then verify all the claims, and if this is fine, everybody creates a multi-signature, and all the results are returned to the importer agent, and if the importer agent has a multi-signature, then he sees that all nodes performed it correctly, and then he can issue it.
But only the importer agent talks to Facebook?
Yes. Well, the user has to identify them later. You will be redirected. If you press here, log in with Facebook, then you're redirected to Facebook, to the identity provider.
And the validators don't see, for example, which was my name on Facebook or whatever, they just get a JSON web token. Or do they get the whole data that Facebook sends?
Well, they are performing the signature validation. This means they need the plain data. Okay. And this was the issue of this concept, which we removed now. Now what we are doing is we are doing this with encrypted data. So the data are being encrypted for the user, and we're using a blind signature scheme and some zero knowledge proofs, and then the importer as well. The import is only a proxy then anymore, and the nodes perform the same multi-signature, but nobody has the plain data. So the downside of this first concept was that the nodes had the plain data, but it was important for us to see if it's actually feasible to implement a system like this, and if this would work. And then in the next step we enhanced it and created it privacy preserving.
Okay, so, Didi, one last question.
Was it done with snarks or something else?
Yeah, no, so we used actually a commitment scheme, and
because you mentioned zero knowledge proofs, was there any toxic waste?
Toxic waste. Well, the knowledge proof we created was non-interactive. So the problem is if you prove a signature, the proofs get really huge. So it's also a downside and also gives space for later improvement. And we did not use snarks. Actually, I have a master thesis available on CK snarks for verifying this, but no student was or wanted to do this yet. What we wanted to do is we want to extend such an snarks compiler in order to perform things like the signature and that the attributes are coming from this. Yeah, but if someone is interested, there's a master thesis.
Bachelor degree first.
Yeah, this would be good.
Okay, thanks for all your questions. Thanks for your talk. Please, but it's not over yet. We will have a fireside chat in a minute. We just need about a minute to rearrange a little bit. Okay, guys. Welcome back after our short break. Now we start with our little fireside chat about SSI and privacy. you already know two of the guys sitting here with me. One we didn't see and hear yet today, so I may ask you to introduce yourself and maybe tell us some words about your connection to the self-sovereign identity topic.
Sure, thank you for the invitation. My name is Markus Sabadello. I'm founder of a small startup in Vienna. It's called Danube Tech. I've worked on digital identity technologies for a long time, more than 10 years. So I really liked how Andreas explained the evolution of the different concepts of identity: centralized, federated, user-centric, self-sovereign. And I've just worked over the last 10 to 15 years on a lot of technologies, protocols, standards that have emerged in this space. And now we see the SSI architecture, as I mentioned.
So as far as I know, you are kind of also an expert about what's really going on in the scene right now. So what is the leading technology from your point of view in the SSI?
So I travel a lot. I go to a lot of conferences. I know a lot of people in a lot of companies and communities and consortia, and I have no idea which one is the leading one. It's moving very fast. A lot of different approaches. A lot of sometimes even competing protocols, standards, technologies. It's not very clear yet. I think the only element in the SSI community that you could call leading, or that everybody seems to agree on, is what Andreas also explained, is the DIDs, the decentralized identifiers, which are going to be standardized. So there's a lot of support for that. IBM, Microsoft, lots of large organizations at the W3C World Wide Web Consortium support that, and that's, I would say, the one stable, constant element. But everything else, how the verifiable claims work, how the agents work, which kind of ledger or blockchain to use, that's moving very fast and not really clear at this point.
Okay. So Thomas, you mentioned in the beginning and in your introduction Minerva. As some here know, it's a project that is developed within the Lab 10 collective. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the approach in Minerva and what kind of technologies do you use?
Yeah. So, well, basically, I told you before that I was at DEF CON, and basically what you could see there, you have either somebody is very concentrated on identity, and it might be connected with zero-knowledge proofs, or of course DID, self-sovereign identity was a big topic. There was identity and reputation workshops, so basically building on identity some reputation schemes as well. Or you find something like MetaMask, where you basically have a wallet for cryptocurrencies. So the combination of it is, well, at least I didn't stumble over it. So there, and I think that's kind of special. So I think that's kind of helpful to not see it either as a crypto trader kind of approach where you have all your coins in there and nothing else, or this identity approach where you either have one identity or maybe several identities. And I think we're also kind of very different in that respect. You find something with several identities in Newport, but it is done in a different way. So basically in Minerva it's really separate identities, which is handled each for itself. And you can start kind of creating or thinking about your identities in a very fine-grained way with verifiable claims or credentials connected to it. So therefore, I think the approach is much more natural to normal human beings for getting it used to it. And the other thing what we're doing in Minerva is actually not kind of putting it up front as an application which is used by everybody all the time, but we rather see it to call it at the moment when it is really needed. So it's I show you a short demo because it's always a little difficult to tell. How does basically let's see. see it now. So basically, what you see here is on my screen. So if the interaction with the application should be kind of seamless. So we were talking with somebody from the banking sector doing strong customer authentication. So in the current development for the PSD2 in the banking, they need to provide strong customer authentication, and the important part here is to have a two-factor authentication. And one thing, if you consider N27 a banking app, so that's just kind of a placeholder. So you could think of a login, a painless login. So if I go here for painless login, then it opens the Minerva app. So basically there's a call for the second app on the phone, just for that kind of application. Then I confirm it with my fingerprint, basically confirmation, and I'm in the banking app. So if I want to do a new transaction, I go there, say, well, it's Thomas, it's some IBAN, and basically authorize. It calls again the Minerva app, and just for that kind of authorization, basically you confirm it, say okay, that's it. So all these kind of, when I need the app, it's just called, and when I don't need, I just don't open it. So it's rather a very different concept from the logic, which is in our understanding sort of different in a way that basically you would see it rather as a kind of Minerva in here, having IDs and cryptocurrencies or whatever kind of thing in there, and other applications which are just connecting to this one in the case when it's needed, either for identification or for some coins or some price reductions or whatever. So not kind of trying to push it up front and where you have to interact. So it's just when you need it, you use it. So that's the difference. Mm-hmm. Kind of, I think that's kind of a very different approach than a lot of the others are doing.
I already would like to open it up. It shouldn't be just a chat here in front. So if you have any topics to throw in or questions, please just show your sign up. Okay.
Well, but so they're using this app as a second factor, I guess, sort of, but I know that a few banking sites also use a similar concept about the second app for two-factor, but isn't it a bit weak to have the second factor on the same device?
No, it's fulfilling the regulation. So basically banks are doing the things which are fulfilling the regulation.
The regulation is a bit...
Well, the regulation even allows that you put the verification or the signature into the same app. So banks only will do what is kind of fulfilling the expectation from the regulation. Is what I kind of see. And
the tag vectors and everything, isn't it a bit? I'm not sure how this.
Well, you know, security and convenience always has some sort of trade-off. So you know, if you want to do a really second device, more secure, sure.
Yeah. So there are two huge kinds of identity providers, right? So there are companies that are usually startups that have not existed 30 years ago, and there are governments which have existed for hundreds of years already and provided identities already. So I would expect companies that are moving quite fast to maybe be faster to adopt this stuff as well. I can log in with Facebook, but I cannot log in with my driving license. how long will it take for governments to take this up? Or are they more interested in a more long-term solution? Do you see self-sovereign identity as a long-term solution, or is this also just a stepping stone for something else? Probably you.
So I have a few thoughts on that. I would say in addition to these two kinds of identity providers, governments and companies in the self-sovereign identity system, there's actually a third kind of identity provider, which is all of us individuals. So I could today, with this architecture, issue a claim to you saying that you are a good Java programmer or something like that. So or whatever. In the system, anyone can create a DID, anyone can create a self-sovereign identity without an intermediary, and then anyone can be an issuer of a claim, a subject of a claim, and also a recipient, a service provider of a claim. And so the technology itself doesn't say it has to be a government or a company or an individual. Of course, on top of that, we build what we usually call a trust framework, where we then describe also on the business and on the legal level who do we trust with certain information. Right? If I issue a claim to you that you're a great brain surgeon, then he would probably not trust that if he needs brain surgery. He would not trust what I say, but he would trust a claim that's issued by a university. So on the technical level, we are very open, and then on the business and legal level, that's when we decide who is an issuer and who accepts what claims, and the website can decide will they accept the government's driver's license, will they accept the Facebook account, will they accept maybe a claim issued by 3 people, maybe if three of us attest that this is Thomas Zeinzinger, then maybe he can go to a website and log in, and maybe for that website it's good enough to know that 3 members of the Lab 10 collective, for example, stated that he's Thomas Zeinzinger, and then maybe he can log in with that, and maybe for some use cases that's good enough and you don't need a government driver's license. So the system is very open. It's open to that. What will actually happen and what will be deployed and successful at what point in time, I think is difficult to say. I think especially the government involvement in this system can be a little bit tricky, because in some way this idea of individual self-sovereignty could be misinterpreted as being in conflict with the traditional sovereignty of the state. Right? So I think you asked the question earlier whether governments would accept that, but this must not be misunderstood as meaning that I as an individual have complete control over how I'm presented to someone. So I cannot issue my own driver's license. We still need trusted authorities like a government to attest to certain information in order for it to be trusted.
Yeah. Will I also be forced to open up my identity further? So, for example, currently there's the issue in Austria that people are claiming, okay, this person is illegally also a Turkish citizen in addition to the Austrian citizenship. And it's very hard for people to prove this way, or especially to disprove, because it's very hard to prove the negative. Do you see this maybe also as a risk of this, that if all my identity data is stored with me, that I might be compelled by the state or by someone else to open up all my identity data towards them to prove the negative, for example?
Well, if you have your wallet in your hand and someone comes to your house and threatens you with a gun in their hand, and probably you would open up your wallet and you would give them access to your data. That is your question. If you're required by law or through force or some kind of external pressure to open up control over your identity, then this doesn't automatically protect you from that. What this does give you is that all requests and all flow of data goes through you. So every time you share something, if you want to prove what kind of citizen you are, or whether you're, the question of disproving something is also just another kind of claim, right? So you can claim you're not a Turkish citizen. That claim could be signed by someone. So maybe you could actually go to the Turkish authorities and ask them to issue a claim to you that says you're not a Turkish citizen, and then you can use that in some interaction to prove that you're not.
I mean, the problem is if everything is centralized to me, because right now my identity would be decentralized more than it would be with self-sovereignty. Because I have an identity at Facebook, at Google, at the Austrian government,
But a credential is given by that particular authority. So basically you can't kind of say, well, again, if I would say you're not Turkish citizen, that's not really much of a value, because if Turkish say you're not a Turkish citizen, that's kind of respected probably by the Austrian state as well. So this is not identity based, this is credential based.
No, but it's also a different risk scenario. So if I have every single identity that I'm going to use right now with me all the time, because I also need to protect it, then this is a much higher value target than if I say, okay, well, I don't remember my password right now, do what you want, or yes, you can have the password from my Facebook account because you're interested in whatever on there, but that does not mean that you will also be able to impersonate me through my password.
I agree. Maybe one answer could be that you can have many DIDs, you can have many agents and wallets in this system, and keep in mind there's no central list of all the DIDs and all the identities in the system. So if someone comes to you and somebody wants to force you or whatever, or attack your identity, there's not really a way for them to know how many of them do you have. They don't know. Do you maybe have 3 different DIDs, and one of them is only printed out on a piece of paper as a QR code in your bank vault or under your bed, and you don't actually have that right now in your Minerva app. It's maybe stored elsewhere, and it's more secure. So you could have these also multiple.
So that would be again a trade-off.
Yes, sure. If you want to have it convenient, then you have it in one place. If you want to increase safety, then
on the other hand, if they break into your agent with your data, then they only break into your agent, right, and not into 10 million records as it is with things like Facebook.
But I don't see the difference between how it is now, because if you're going traveling, you may have your passport with you and your driving license, and this is the same. So if someone steals your things, so they will have everything of you. So it's the same attack vector.
It might be easier to impersonate someone who is only represented by a key pair than a passport.
But you can revoke the claims if they're stolen. So.
I had to do this with my passport, and it's a bit of a procedure.
Yeah, but so it's not worse.
But we have here somebody who is working on e-government systems. So
how would you revoke it if you don't have your passport?
You need to have a backup of your revoke.
Sure. The embassy will.
Your claim is stolen, no? And you report it.
How will the embassy know that you are you?
Then doing illegal.
How do you prove your identity to your embassy if you don't have your identity with you anymore?
But isn't this the problem also right now? If you go
in
a foreign country, and then
definitely. So if you're losing all your identities, then you're kind of fucked.
Let's try to stay in one discussion.
I think the actual solution, for example, if you really lose everything of your paper and you're new in this new city, then you need, I think, a few people that can authorize you. Then you can go to the government and you get it back. And it's possible to do the same with some network. You claim that a few people, maybe 5, 10 or whatever, know that you are you. And then you can get a new identity or your old identity back in some way. And of course you have to build the network before, because afterwards also a bad guy could build his own network with his identity, and that's maybe the same way to work with the
We have a conspiracy and signatures.
This is something which is called social recovery, and it was tried in different projects already.
Facebook.
Yeah, for example. Yeah. I know that in Newport they did a test with this way of kind of trying to recover the identity based on your social networks to give away the credentials to multiple friends or family, and they are acting as a backup. And then you combine different keys, and then you can restore your identity.
And how did it work out?
It didn't. It's very tricky because there is a lot of issues in the context of how to securely distribute that, how to make sure that they are up and alive, means that that they didn't remove the app or whatever the solution is there, right? So it's really hard. There is a lot of different problems to actually manage the small social network which you need to maintain and make sure that it's healthy all the time. So, for example, if one device is lost, then you need to make sure that you will have another backup and create a new one. So it's kind of difficult.
Probably the same issue that cryptocurrencies ran into. Like, be your own bank means that you also need to be your own bank.
Yeah, we are responsible for that.
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same thing. It's basically maintaining control of your keys and how do you backup keys and how do you restore them, and proving control of your DID is very very much the same as controlling a Bitcoin address. And going back to your earlier question, right? There's also no way for someone to know all your Bitcoin addresses. I cannot find out a list of all your Bitcoin addresses. You may still have a few that nobody knows about, and in the same way, you could have multiple DIDs where you distribute parts of your identity, and if somebody attacks you, they may only be able to discover some of it, but you may have a few more hidden DIDs, just like you may have some hidden Bitcoin addresses that you don't want anyone to discover.
It was also a topic in one discussion I followed that basically you should be able to have not just basically one ID which can be followed all over the internet with all your interactions. That would be kind of silly. So it's like they had quite frequently you saw somebody from Spankchain there. I don't know if you know the project. Which is of course interested in everything what is happening horizontally, but basically they're doing interesting tech, and they're it's like a adult performer doesn't want to have her identity which kind of exposed to all the other identities. This is like has to be clearly separated. This is also a kind of security issue, and it's often also connected somehow to as a security issue. It's really important to have different identities and have those different identities really separated. That's.
I think on the opposite, you also want to have the ability to link identities, especially for this reputation gain. So if I'm known on, I don't know, Twitter or on my LinkedIn blog or whatever as the same person, this has an additional benefit to my reputation. So if the people can follow me on multiple platforms.
Yeah, we were discussing a similar thing in a zero knowledge proof kind of discussion that you maybe have created a Twitter account when you were 15, and then you come into adult life and you're in profession, and then you can't use your Twitter account anymore because you said so many silly things all during growing up, and then it would be nice to say, well, I have a really long social profile, but I need to create that new account so I look like a complete newbie. But how about kind of proving that basically you have another Twitter account which has a social profile without revealing it, but having a proof that basically zero knowledge proof that you have another identity which is kind of broadly accepted and really kind of a long time active. on the account. So therefore, the zero knowledge comes into those kind of things where you basically can shield identities from each other, but still prove that you have another one.
So basically, trust me, I'm not a noob.
Yeah.
There was another question.
Well, in your opinion, what will be the sectors that adopts self-sovereign identity in a large scale first? I mean, it says banking, when I read smart home, maybe IoT devices. If it is it something completely different? What's your opinion on that? Who will be, it will not be the government, I think this is for sure.
It's more for you.
I don't know. I see that around the world there are dozens or hundreds of projects, proof of concepts happening where actual companies, businesses like banks and insurance companies and others are experimenting with this kind of technology. And as Andreas mentioned in his presentation, there are not just advantages for us as individuals like privacy and control and so on, but there are also advantages for businesses, for they can save costs on their KYC processes, they can get higher quality verified data about their customers and so on. So that's why a lot of work is happening with large institutions. Whether that will be the channel through which this technology will be deployed and successful, I'm not sure. So personally, I'm much more interested in the more peer-to-peer individual relationships, which attestations, statements that we make about each other. So I find it less interesting that the bank saying about me what is my credit score, or the post saying what is my address, or the government saying what is my date of birth. I find it much more interesting that statements, verifiable statements that we can make about each other. This is the classic idea of the web of trust. And I don't see anything happening there really. So all the proof of concepts are always about the customer and relationship to the vendor, to the company. I would like to see more of the more organic peer-to-peer social networking approach of this technology.
I think this web of trust approach is not so accepted by the companies, that if you go there and say, this is me, this is my identity, and look, 17 people confirmed that, so they may not have the trust in this information. But of course, it's somehow silly, because why would these 17 people lie? Or I don't know.
Isn't it the same as on LinkedIn, basically?
LinkedIn?
Yeah, when I say you are an expert in telecommunications and what only.
So yeah, of course. But
it's also a kind of web of trust, but central.
That's true, yeah, that's true.
But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in Austria you can legally conduct any transaction or any business with the state without possessing any kind of legal documents yourself if you bring two witnesses. So if I want to get married, if I want to buy a house, if I want to start a company, I go to the appropriate institutions of the state, and I don't bring any documentation, but I bring two people, and well, they need the proper documentation, but they can attest as witnesses that this is my name, this is my date of birth, and I can get married, and I can start a company, and I can buy a house. I think this is possible in Austria. Nobody knows about.
I'm not sure about that.
Could they bring two people?
No, so they need. I think they need.
So you already think about a pyramid scheme.
They need the proper documents, and they must not be related to you, I think. So not your.
Interesting. Nobody knows probably about that.
I think once.
Well, I heard a couple of use cases from Newport. They're problem driven. So one was onboarding volunteers at the Red Cross at the disaster site, so to make that faster and more reliable than the current process. And the other one was basically in Brazil, and somebody confirmed it that happens in big corporations as well. In Brazil, you have like 8 different kind of identity schemes, because every kind of department or area has its own identity scheme. So, but then you have, of course, all separate silos, and you don't know, is that identity already in some other silo as well present or not? Do you have double counting? Then you need to connect those databases, and that's becoming very difficult. And the same thing happens in big organizations. And then there is maybe somebody in Brazil, there seems to be somebody to kind of use self-sovereign identity as a kind of unifier of getting that on a different kind of system instead of trying to get them into one system and using it for something like that. And big corporations would just have the same problem. They purchase different companies, then they either do a strong integration process or they leave the system as it is, but then you have all separate systems, then you need to connect all those kind of systems, then you can start kind of thinking, why not having kind of one completely different system which is basically possible to build in parallel. And then self-sovereign identity comes quite handy into play.
Robert.
I would like to back a little bit to that what you said in the context of peer-to-peer identification and kind of claim exchange. And this what is interesting from my point of view is that because we are talking about controlling identity, right? I decide who knows about me what, right? I can fully control that because the data flow comes through my, let's say, point of where the identities are stored, or at least their claims and stuff like that. What do you think about the right to know about something, know about a person? For example, you commit a crime, and I would like to know about that, and society should know about it. But of course, if I'm in control of those data, I will say that no, I don't want to reveal those information to anybody, right? How the whole SSI and this kind of, is it already possible to implement a solution like that someone issue a claim from me somewhere, that anybody can look it up and basically verify that is attached to my identity? How easy is to lose that identity, like, you know, being forgotten about whatever I did in the past? What's your thought about that?
So I think maybe one or 2 years ago, in this community, we still had a very strong notion or language where we always said we should own our identity, right? The identity owner. This allows me to own my identity. But more recently, this has become more problematic, and we don't talk about ownership so much. Owning identity, owning data is not a very, very good model, and we talk more about control or shared rights to data or identity, because like you said, sometimes it's not so clear. You might argue that if I have HIV, you could say this is an attribute that I own and nobody else should know that. But if I have Ebola, then probably others also have a right to know that. Like you said, there was also some Nazi concentration camp guard a trial a few years ago where they found someone who was a guard at the concentration camp, and he tried to invoke the right to be forgotten, right? He said, I wanted to destroy that kind of data that you have about me because it's my personal data. So of course this also isn't a great approach. I think the issuers, the ones who make statements, they in some cases they also have rights to that data, and even under GDPR, the right to be forgotten or the right to erasure is not absolute. It doesn't always apply. And in the same way here, I don't think that the fact that attributes are controlled by my agent and my DIDs doesn't mean that nobody else has a copy of that information. It's sometimes legitimate.
But basically, issuing a claim for anybody is like the valid way of doing it. Let's say I can issue a claim for your DID about anything. I have a right to that, right? There is no any protection against that, right? So any government could issue something against you on the DIDs which they know that you are in the sense, right? So you can't protect yourself against that.
That's right.
Okay.
So one kind of mobbing is also possible.
Yeah.
Well, maybe one thing which is interesting, what I heard at the from a startup which is working on the zero knowledge proof, is actually one-time claims. So basically, or verified credentials, so that you can prove something to somebody. but that somebody can't give it to anybody else because he can't give that data on to somebody else. So that's a nice feature. What they kind of proposed in a well, that's done again on this zero knowledge proof stuff. So basically, you can use them once, but the one who receives that claim can't kind of give it to anybody else because then the proof is kind of becoming invalid. So this is a very powerful, I think, concept because basically you can prove it to somebody that somebody can't give your proof away. And you know, it's like that's super helpful in a lot of kind of privacy situations because otherwise you're spreading more and more proofs to various kind of parties. And if somebody's collecting them, basically you're kind of revealed as a person or as an identity or as several identities. So it's a very helpful kind of thing, and that's also, yeah, was very interesting for me to hear that is possible.
Another question?
On the topic of negative claims and pseudonymous identities, if you just think about the traffic outside. So I might be able to prove that some person is not able to drive correctly because I have the camera in my car. I go on the highway and the car zooms by me and I know, okay, I went 130 kilometers per hour, this other car went 200 at least. And I could submit this as a proof somewhere and it would probably get verified. And so this car would, or at least this license plate, would also have a claim attached that whoever drove this car on this date at this time in this place violated traffic laws. And if enough people participate in these schemes, then it would get a bit harder probably and if this information can also be displayed in cars, then it might get a bit harder for people who actually drive recklessly to even get outside. will be constantly cut off the street or maybe will be treated more negatively or at least differently than other cars. Because right now you don't have any idea what the history of a different car in the highway is.
So think about Stasi or the system in China now, where everyone
the social credit system, for example.
Points. I don't know about that.
But those are attached to you as a person, but not to you as a license plate. And now imagine this car is driven by different people all the time because it's just a rental car. So you get a rental car and suddenly you get slammed all the time or you get treated very differently by people just because people before you on the same car did something else and you just inherited this identity.
Well, it's a very made up
car is a made up story, but there could be other identities that are being shared. Is there some kind of idea or solution? Because this might also even violate GDPR.
I think there is no problem. No, it's like in countries where this is a problem, you have dash cams. So basically people are having dash cams on their cars and that they can prove in the case of an accident that it happened this and that. So, it's like, here it's not a problem. Usually people help you by showing that the police is actually up front and that they're doing a speed control. And if somebody is kind of, you have a normal legal system and basically it's not that everybody knows everybody's kind of activities and so on just because of that system. So this is kind of a made-up case for me, and which should be solved when it's really a problem, but it should not be discussed in the case that it maybe will be a problem in some distant future. So this is for me, it's hard.
I think you're describing a scenario that uses verifiable claims. It's somebody making a statement about something. You're not verifiable claims, but you're not really describing a self-sovereign scenario because the claim is not issued to the subject. So you issued a claim public database or the police or something, and that's also a possible application of the verifiable claims technology, but it's not really an application of self-sovereign identity. But still, there's an interesting question: do you issue the claim about the driver or about the car? Right? That's one of the questions that you described.
It's a similar case that was happening in Vienna right now. But someone wrote a statement to an ex-member of the Nationalrat, and then afterwards claimed, okay, the computer was just standing there. Someone else must have used it. It was my Facebook account, but it was not me who wrote this.
Yeah, you can do that. No, well, I think in
which is a very difficult situation because especially with self-sovereign identity, if someone can and this went through, so like the proof was not enough that this Facebook account was writing a personal message to have the claim that this person wrote the message. So if I find a phone on the ground and it's unlocked and I type something in. With self-sovereign identity, should this be this person, or should there still be someone else who receives the message? Should this person still not be able to assume that this is me, or that this is the person that owned the phone before? Because if that's the case, then self-sovereign identity is anyways just tied to an object and not to a person.
But this legally works more easy if you, I don't know, fake a signature. You have also proof that you didn't sign the document with pen. Huh?
Yeah.
So
I think it's not really a new problem. So it will be just a digital kind of form of the same problem. So finding somebody to prove that you didn't do what kind of seems that you have done. I think that's something. Yeah, it will happen.
Different PIN has different
it's like
scenarios than just signing a signature, and you will get treated differently if someone bought something online with a credit card where a signature was forged, or if someone bought something online where a chip and PIN verification was done.
There is an interesting concept which was discussed during identity workshop. It was called "Forget about identity, think about identification." So do not attach attribute to the identity. So do not treat a person as a set of attributes with the identities, right? Just try to figure out the pattern about how to identify the person without looking up just the specific attributes which are attached to you. So you can look it up and read the notes from the session. Maybe you will have some kind of answer on that problem, because the problem is not kind of SSI doesn't solve that problem at all. Because I mean, as soon as you if someone steals your wallet, yeah, he can use that, right? As soon as it's unlocked or easily accessible, right? You can of course easily revoke the stuff which you have in the wallet. So say that please revoke all the identities which I have in the wallet because I lost it, right? But yeah,
that's maybe even easier if you have it digitally than analog.
Yeah,
so
sure,
it's like it would be a horrible thing if I kind of lose all my cards. Because it will be even hard to remember all of them. So this is a nightmare scenario of losing all those cards in your kind of analog wallet.
Isn't the law pretty clear that they must prove that you did it and not your identity did it? So if there's some murder and there's my passport laying on the ground, that doesn't prove I was the murderer. So there must be another proof, right?
The law said that they need to prove that you did it. You don't have to prove that you did it.
Yeah, so that's exactly what they say. And not so if my identity was stolen still, they have to prove that I was using the identity. And not the identity was used. The identity was maybe misused because I did some mistake and I got lost access of my own identity.
Yeah, but it's quite a process, basically. It's not typical here in Austria that you have identity theft that much. but Sandra had it once. So basically, somebody was taking her identity and purchasing something online, and then of course they didn't pay, and then some invoicing company was hired to get the money paid, and then you get all these kind of invoices. And when she went to the police and said, well, somebody just in my name ordered something, then they kind of were totally unaware that something like identity theft is happening, and they were like, was it really not you who bought it? Kind of thing. But still, it's like in America it's very usual. So a lot of identity theft is happening, but here it's kind of unusual that that is happening very frequently. So otherwise the police would be more aware of it. But nevertheless it's happening. So identity theft is happening, and of course depends also on the process for payment. You know, it's like if you can pay afterwards, after the fact of purchasing something, then it's super simple for fraudsters to just use any particular name and get something delivered, vanish, and then when they start looking up that name, they find an address, and then kind of these invoicing companies come after you and try to get that money for their clients. So because that's a kind of stupid way of, yeah, there is no proof for identity. It's kind of the purchase process is just too simple to be tricked.
Do you think that GDPR will considerably high adoption as a side?
I think it's one of the developments that creates interest among corporations and companies to look at this. It's not the only thing, but it certainly helps.
And from the user side, do you think users will trust this more than corporations?
I don't know. Individuals' motivations is always difficult. I don't think anyone, or even any of us, maybe will adopt this if all it provides is a little bit more privacy or security or whatever. We've had PGP for 25 years and nobody uses it. So I think there has to be more than additional privacy. It also has to be, I don't know, convenience or being able to do things simpler, or saving money, or doing something cool that I wasn't able to do before.
I would assume even with SSI schemes, it's possible to also federate your identity to a centralized provider, right? To say, okay, all my Facebook identity is still handled by Facebook, or all my, I don't know, address identity part is handled by the central address register, or something like that, right?
Yeah, so the data that's in Facebook is not self-sovereign, right? But there are a number of ways how you can combine that, kind of like.
If I'm self-sovereign, I'm also able to say, okay, I'm not willing to store this with me, but I'm willing to hand this part of my identity off to this provider.
Yeah, so there are some interesting data models and technologies. So what you could do is if somebody asks you your agent using the self-sovereign identity protocols and architectures, and some service provider asks you for your address, then instead of responding with your address, you could respond with a point or a redirect and tell them my address is here on Facebook. You can get it from there. You can use some technologies from the semantic web linked data kind of graph model. So a powerful way of modeling identities is using a graph, right, where everything is a node and an arc, and there's one node that represents me and my DID, and then I have all these attributes, but another node is me in Facebook, and you could come up with a theoretical graph model where my self-sovereign identity is one node in the graph, and my Facebook identity is another node in the graph, and you can point to that and you can connect them, and then with the right protocols you could do this sort of thing, redirection or importing or exporting from one place to the other.
I'm sort of unprepared. I should have prepared my deletion of my Facebook account because it's getting much more traction than I needed, or much more visibility that you could have a Facebook account you should not have. So the point is that basically you have your centralized identity providers which lose all the time your identities and millions of identities, and Facebook just had another accident. And that's the point. So on one side we're talking about security and privacy and that kind of stuff, and then we say, oh yeah, well, Facebook just lost another, I don't know, 55 million, or I can't remember. It's like, it does not really matter how much kind of things are lost there. I think, of course, it needs to be built in a way that is usable and convenient to use, but take into consideration that you have identity providers which are silos and which are able to revoke your identity where you're logged in 20 or 30 sites. So you might just lose the access to a lot of kind of sites by just one identity provider not liking you anymore.
So 3 more questions.
But in the end, Facebook will not store a pointer to my identity, but they will also replicate the data. So they will not store, okay, this is identity number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and whenever I'm online, my friends on Facebook can see my name, and if I'm offline, it cannot be displayed because I'm not online and I'm not able to show this to them. But Facebook will also duplicate the data that I'm revealing to them. So even if they get breached, all the data that I already revealed to them, they will also be able to lose. So yeah, that's kind of like, okay, yeah, parts of my identity can be stolen, but maybe they will not get my credit card information, for example.
The point would be that basically you might get different providers like Facebook, which are not so eagerly storing your data and collecting your data. So, because it's basically possible, it's not just not needed, it doesn't have to be that a provider collects all that kind of personal information. And this kind of nosiness of some of the providers is kind of accepted or is kind of usual, but it doesn't have to be. So it's just, you have to prove what you have to prove from a legal perspective. It doesn't have to be that you provide all the kind of information. Of course, if you want to be completely exposed, up to you.
There's also the risk of overexposure. But if you say, okay, it's possible to store my phone number once and have it displayed on all my accounts wherever I'm at, then I'm more willing to keep this phone number and to show it on every account. Yeah.
Is there any standards or conventions emerging about how to link the IDs to domain names?
Yes, actually, how to link the IDs to domain names. So both are types of identifiers, right? The IDs are identifiers that are self-sovereign, that don't require central authority, that I can create on my own without an intermediary. The IDs are persistent, they can last for a long time, I don't have to renew them every year, so they have a lot of advantages. They have one main disadvantage, the IDs, they're not human readable, right? They have a long random looking kind of public key hash syntax. They look a little bit like Bitcoin addresses, nobody can remember them. On the other hand, domain names are a very well established kind of identifier which is human readable. There's some downsides, they are not decentralized, they are not self-sovereign. Yes, there's one specification that I know of. It's an IETF draft specification that describes how, given a domain name, you can discover a DID. So if I give you my domain name, and with the right set of tools and libraries, you can find the corresponding DID and then use that in your application. And the other way around works too. Starting with a DID, you can point to a domain name using the standard DID resolution process.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, let's assume that SSI is in place. We already have a super cool Minerva digital wallet, we have all the identities there, all the data are in control. Do you really think that actually this will prevent companies like Facebook, Google, or other famous one from collecting those data from the users? Because, I mean, it would be even easier for them to ask everybody in a standardized way, please provide me all your data. This is, the schema which I request because I need to know your name, address, location, whatever, and I know where to ask to get them. Do you think that this will somehow change in a way as it is right now, that they will not have those data?
Do you already check all your address books and so on? So it cannot get worse.
Well, I'm not sure. So it's like you have this kind of data scarcity concept also with GDPR, and I'm not sure if at some point in time, taking your SSI in place and everything, so why should not somebody sue one of those big companies because they are collecting much more than you really need? So I would not kind of rule it out. So it's like, it's hard to tell. So it's.
But actually, just to expand on the question, because right now everyone assumes that all those companies are not telling us what kind of data they're collecting for us. That's not true, actually. If you try really hard, you can figure out what kind of data they're collecting about you, and actually, from some of them, you can request to see those data. Google is one of the examples.
Well, basically in Austria, you have that right. You can request it from everybody,
yeah,
even from Billa or
Europe
wherever.
it's more or less the same regulation, but yeah, the question is if this will change.
In my opinion, services like Facebook or Google, they provide really good services to us, like the Gmail or whatever, or the calendar, the Drive. But they do this, the business model is like this because we give them the data, so they make the money with this. So this can also be a problem in the future if I say, okay, I'm not giving you all the data because this is what they make their benefit with. So this can be a problem, and they, what's the point of providing these services to the user then anymore from the point of the company?
Yeah, but then
pay for it.
Yeah, you can pay for it, yeah. But the thing is, are you going to pay for an app which is now for free and works well?
Yeah, but most people, if they ask you, give me your data, you get it for free, or pay me $12 a month.
Or $5 or whatever.
Or $5, most of the people will say, take the data.
That's the point.
Anyway, it doesn't work.
That's the point, yeah.
So maybe another way of asking that question, do you think that the society will change the mindset of people thinking about their privacy and their identity, knowing what stuff is there, or being more aware maybe of that?
A friend of mine has an interesting metaphor. He sometimes compares this to what do we eat and how do we feed ourselves, and there's a way to eat very healthy and to buy organic food, to spend a lot of time in the supermarket, look at all the labels, then be at home, cook for 2 hours, and then eat a really healthy meal, right? And then the other thing you can do is you can go to McDonald's and get something there. So Facebook is a little bit like the McDonald's of personal data. If you win, so the self-sovereign identity way does require some additional effort, I would say, but it pays off.
Yeah.
I think it will happen and it already happens, if you want life insurance or whatever, or health insurance or whatever, and the company says, well, I see we have data on Facebook, you're eating very unhealthy and you're doing very risky sport, and your insurance is doubled. This happens already in some countries. And if this happens more and more often, people get aware. Okay, I gave my data away for like 100 gig of storage, and now I have to pay 100, 200 euros a month more for my insurance. I think then people will realize, and that will happen.
But then you will cheat the insurance company.
But personally, I think that SSI won't kind of change that mindset. So basically, it gives you a new way of being able in control of things, but you should not kind of rely on people will use it because of more privacy and they will accept inconvenience or super high payments for it. So, but it offers a lot of interesting new possibilities, I think, and because of that, you should rather look at the possibilities, not kind of SSIs coming into place because people will just kind of and say, "Oh, that's everything I have been waiting for." I mean, just ask yourself, ask your friends. They have not been waiting for SSI to come on stage, and because of that, you can't expect that people will just come here. You have to kind of be the one who is kind of making the system, which is super convenient, and I think there we are on the right track to do things which are increasing convenience actually. Because, well, if you look at the payment process, that's kind of a super inconvenient kind of thing. It's unimaginable, even if you know, it's like PayPal going through there, several steps, then maybe, or other processes where you get something sent on a different phone, which you don't have at hand currently. So this is all kind of silly, and it can be all done in a better way. But you can solve it by using self-sovereign identity or have centralized providers, and nevertheless never kind of make it uncomfortable or super expensive. So somebody has to pay the cost, of course, but making sure that it's not kind of exceeding the costs which are accepted.
It seems to me that's a nice conclusion to a long discussion. So maybe we get a last round. If somebody has a question left, maybe you want to.
Or you all thirsty like I am.
Yeah. Otherwise, we get the beers first, and then we discuss within smaller groups later on. So thank you very much for being part of this Fireside Chat.